It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I thought it would be cool to talk about a different Mike today. So, another Mike C. This time, I want to talk about a dear friend who I've known for many, many, many years. We actually worked very early in our careers at the same Agile tool company, and we both went our separate ways to create our own organizations, and there was no looking back at that point. But this gentleman, Mike Kottmeyer, has really been a great friend, a great mentor, a great Agilist, and just someone who I have a great deal of respect for. So I received an email from one of our listeners who asked us to review an article called The Four Common Misconceptions About Agile Transformation. And when I flipped to it, I was excited to see it was by Mike. So I think this would be a good idea. So let's pull together and see what Mike had to say. He said, as a community, we've helped develop a handful of team based Agile approaches over the years, some of which we consider scale. But here we are, more than 20 years past signing a manifesto, and we still don't have the whole thing nailed. Implementing Agile, especially in large, more complex organizations, still seems like some type of dark art. Why is it so difficult? Why is transformation so hard? Even though we both might not have been around when things like XP and Scrum were totally invented, but we both had a fair amount of time spent with Ken Schwaber, Alistair Coburn, and others, signers of the Agile Manifesto. If you ask Mike, here's how he says, I think it went down something like this. Now I'm going to give you my input as we go because I have a concept of how I think it went down too. So here we go. We have these small teams working on trouble projects. When things hit the fan, I always say when the fit hits the shan, because the shan is a very important person. Oftentimes, we get everyone in the same room, we pull the customer close, we make everything visible, we operate in a highly collaborative fashion. And when we do this, we seem to be able to deliver and test frequently and overcome whatever objective or problems there. Someone along the way came up with writing requirements as user stories and putting them on cards. They hypothesized that estimating the cards and doing burn down charts would increase throughput. That having weekly planning cadences, daily scrums, reviews, and retrospectives would give people a reason to get in the same room and collaborate. Eventually, they landed on the idea of test driven development and continuous integration and deployment, CI/CD. Over time, different roles and responsibilities emerged. All the things we consider hallmarks of a small team, agile methodology. As these methodologies emerged, the people inventing each of them found each other. At one point, 17 of them got together at Snowbird. I think we all know the story. And it was for a weekend of skiing. And in a hunt for what everybody had in common, they came up with the principles behind the Agile Manifesto. Now, I teach this all the time in my certification classes. I always spend a few minutes talking about the manifesto, where it happened, who was there. And sometimes people are like, why do you spend time there? Why is that so important? Well, the methodologies organically emerged as a set of practices. They were codified into a set of values and principles. And what is certainly noted, but often not materially emphasized, is the importance of small, co located teams that are in direct contact with an actual consumer. I'd suggest small, co located teams are the secret sauce behind practices, values, and principles of implementing Agile correctly within your organization. Fast forward a few years, and agile methodologies have a bunch of success, and it's starting to really go mainstream. Things really take off with the advent of the CSM certification and PMI finally recognizing agile as a legitimate way to do software project management and incorporating it into their traditional project management PMP professional certification. The truth is that agile methodologies are process focused and agnostic to organizational design. Agile project management is totally dependent on organizational design. Interesting. So I'll say it one more time. Traditional project management methodologies are process focused and agnostic to organizational design. Agile is totally dependent on organizational design. As an aside, I was in the room. Well, this is from Mike. I was in the room when the PMI ACP certification was invented. There was almost no discussion on the importance of teaming strategies to the methodology, Somehow that was out of scope. So, why do we need a history lesson? I think it's relevant to know how most of us think about agile adoption or agile transformation. And I think it leads to many of the common misconceptions I see about the introduction of agile and ways of working. Absolutely true. Let's get to those three misconceptions, Mike. So, misconception number one is agile transformation is about installing practices. The most popular misconception is that Agile is a set of practices or tools that can be installed by trainers and coaches and are plug and play. This is the easy button form of Agile transformation. You train your teams on Agile, the teams start using Agile, recognize their impediments, and change the systems to be more effective at delivery. In practice, most teams are not empowered to change the systems they operate within, so they bastardize the process to accommodate their dysfunction. This is where we see lots of teams going through the motions of Agile and not getting business benefit from doing the approach. This is what I call Agile in name only. The litmus test for this is as follows. Can any given Agile team claim to have a stable velocity against a known backlog? Can they produce a working, tested increment of software every week or two that can be validated by an end customer? If you are doing Scrum, extreme programming, and cannot do that, you are not doing Agile, or you're not doing Agile very well. Even if you are doing Scrum well, it is possible to do Scrum by the book and not create the results. Same is true for extreme programming, same for scaled Agile frameworks, same for large enterprise scaled systems. The same is true for all of them, right? So you want to make sure you understand where the focus is and what you need to do. Misconception number two, agile transformation is about changing culture. This is interesting because I just did a podcast on this. The next most popular misconception about agile transformation is that it is a culture problem. The challenge is that it feels like a culture problem. It feels transformation is hard because of command and control leaders who don't want to delegate or empower their teams. It feels like an attitude and beliefs problem, a behavior problem. But let me tell you, if you understand how or why Agile works and you understand what will get in its way, these leaders are right to stand in the way of Agile. Implementing Scrum or extreme programming or lean startup on top of a tightly coupled legacy mainframe system is a recipe for disaster. Total chaos. You're right. My observation over the past 20 years of doing Agile and transforming organizations is that if you address the underlying technical and organizational concerns, you put forth a credible strategy for dealing with dependencies and governance and audit and compliance, you can often get people to run an experiment. They're willing to give another way of working a try. But often in the early stages, that means compromises to the agile ideal, allowing some compensating controls to emerge to deal with unresolved dependencies, for example. One of my favorite user group questions to ask is this: if you were king for a day, you could do anything you want. You could change anything in the culture or mindset of the organization. What would you do tomorrow? The caveat is that you had to start producing working tested software within a few weeks. What would you change in the org design? The technology architecture? The governance model? Where would you make the adjustments? You see, many of us want to believe that the teams know best. And that may be true about building software specifically, but it's not always true about running a nonprofit or a for profit software company or running a company that builds products and services. There's more to those decisions. And this is why it's just so important for us to understand that it's not always about changing culture, but we have to have a culture that is acceptant of what we're trying to do. All right. Misconception number three, agile transformation is a one time event. Amen, brother. This is the one I was hoping you would put on there. Another popular misconception is that transformation is a one and done. Transformation itself is a process that takes years, years. I have said this so many times. I've spent years with the Walt Disney Company, years with all these other organizations. And what I can tell you is years is correct. That is the correct word. Transformation itself is a process that takes years. It's a starting place. It has an intermediate state and it has a defined end state. But as customers and markets change, your organization has to pivot with them. So the misconception is that the process is linear. And once the process is installed, I'm doing air quotes here, or the culture has shifted, air quotes again, you'll be done. In my experience, this is never the case. Thanks, Mike. We find that getting an organization to change requires a series of intermediate states that have to be traversed as you systematically improve the organization to enable greater business agility and move closer to the ideal. Frankly, though, most of my experience in Agile is in larger, more complex enterprises. My corporate experience prior to joining version 1, that's where we met. Pillar and starting leading Agile was in financial services. Large mainframe platforms, complex business rules, audit requirements, governance, control, dates and requirements that matter to our customers. We could do a lot with Agile, but agility was really difficult. So I've really had to make adjustments or changes in large companies that since I had to make changes in large companies since the very beginning. If you're in a small team, your mileage might vary, but if you're in a large company, you're going to have to make changes. All right, misconception number 4. Team level agile creates business agility. The fourth and final misconception is that the things you do at the team level are sufficient for running agile at scale. My last couple of things we talked about, um, we saw in previous articles and in previous podcasts a lot of traction or a lot of interesting write ups about SAFe, for example, Scaled Agile Framework, and whether or not SAFe is a good agile approach for agile at scale. In some ways, SAFe just isn't sufficient. In other ways, it's way too much. It's overkill. SAFe is too willing to accept organizational dysfunction, and and it ends up becoming it's dysfunction, right? SAFe is too willing to accept organizational dysfunction and dependencies as immutable. It doesn't give us a clear path for change to make the overhead to go down over time. It's too complicated and too complacent with that complication. But SAFe is trying to solve a necessary problem that small teams don't face: their dependencies and their governance. If you don't believe that's an issue, you haven't worked where I've worked and you haven't experienced what I've experienced. Dependencies and governance are a reality. In the presence of these impediments, you have to manage them. But if you don't have a plan for resolving them, SAFe will limit your ability to be agile and to operate with business agility. Both of those statements are true, Mike. I think that we need to have some type of thing in place, but I think that if we're still dealing with locking down business agility, we need to make sure we have an understanding that we don't start with SAFe. We don't start with reorganizing people. We start with figuring out what we're doing, where our gaps are, and organizing values and systems and teams in place to make sure we're doing everything we can to support our agile delivery. Okay, so I think that's a good understanding. Large organizations often struggle because they go straight to the scaled agile stuff. Small organizations often struggle because they don't have enough people to scale properly and do the things they need to do. I think my best advice would be, Mike, to share is that this article is incredible, by the way. I'll definitely drop the link in the description. But my best advice would be for you to figure out what direction your organization is trying to go with Agile. Take a look at these common misconceptions and incorporate your thought processes around them and figure out, what do I need to do to better embrace Agile? And is there something I'm missing? And if so, what is it? And use these misconceptions as a guide, because I think if you do, it's going to help you get off on the right footing. So that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.